Welcome to Ancient Faith Today Live. This is Father Tom Soroka, and I'm so glad that you're with us this afternoon. Welcome to our program. This is a discussion program, and so your participation is really, really important for us. So what we want you to do is to participate in a couple of different ways. Go to youtube.com/Ancient Faith Ministries. Click on the live button and you will see our program being live streamed right now. The reason why you want to watch it live is because this will enable you to participate in the live chat, to be able to give us your comments. We'll talk back and forth about your opinions about today's topic, and it's going to be a fun time. And it's important for us to be able to discuss things, to be able to listen to one another. We've had such a great discussion in the last few weeks. We were talking about our young women leaving religion. We talked about that for 2 weeks. We're going to come back to that topic and topics that are related to that. I think these are very important, and we need to be able to love one another when we discuss this. We are Orthodox Christians. We're Christians that respect one another and love one another. So let's talk about these things together. So you can go to youtube.com/Ancient Faith Ministries. You can also go to facebook.com/Ancient Faith Ministries. Go into that comment section and give us your comments on YouTube. Go into the live chat. Let us know what you are thinking. And of course, if you would like to send us a text message, the odd thing is we've been on YouTube now and people really like going to YouTube. That's great. But remember, if that's not your thing, send a text message to 412-206-5012. That's 412-206-5012. Send us a text message there. And we'll be happy to address that as those comments come in. All right. And by the way, on my Facebook, on my personal Facebook, we already have dozens of comments about today's topic. And so I'm going to be reading some of those also. All right. So what's the topic for today? Well, the general topic, of course, is this idea of religion and the Bible and prayer in public schools. And, there was a time not that long ago, it doesn't seem that long ago, where in the early 1960s, and of course before that, in the public schools, there was prayer. They would say, "Our Father," they would read Bible passages, they would tell Bible stories. And of course, that was a very different time. And we're going to go through the history of what changed in public schools. And the other thing that I do want to say is we are limiting this discussion to be about public schools in the United States. We're going to give some examples from other countries, but the reason why we have to talk about public schools is because the majority of children, the majority of students in the United States go to public schools. The majority of Christians go to public schools. The majority of Orthodox Christians go to public schools. We have done many shows, more than any program on the internet, an Orthodox program on the internet. We have done many shows about classical education, Orthodox education, online education, homeschooling. We've talked about all of that. Today, we're going to talk about the public schools and one particular issue in the public schools. So that's why we're limiting it to that. So even though an easy answer will be like, well, don't send your kids to public schools, that's not an option for today's discussion. All right, let's take a look at the first slide. And this has to do with the Oklahoma State Superintendent. Now, every state in the United States has a superintendent over instruction of the public schools. And that state can determine how the state runs their schools, what the mandatory curriculum is, and so forth. And then, of course, in our country, in many places, the schools are based locally. For instance, in my state in Pennsylvania, there are numerous local public schools, which of course is very expensive because there's a duplicative effort. However, what it does is it allows that particular community to run their public schools and express education in the way that the voters want. So you'll see up on the screen here, we have Oklahoma State Superintendent, and this is from CNN. It says, all Oklahoma schools are required to incorporate the Bible and the Ten Commandments in their curriculums, effective immediately. The state's chief education officer announced in a memorandum on Thursday. I think this was in June of this year. At a state board of education meeting, Oklahoma State Superintendent of Public Instruction Ryan Walters said the Bible is, quote, one of the most foundational documents used for the Constitution and the birth of our country. He goes on, it's crystal clear to us that in the Oklahoma academic standards under Title 70, on multiple occasions, the Bible is a necessary historical document to teach our kids about the history of this country, to have a complete understanding of Western civilization, to have an understanding of the basis of our legal system, Walters said. And that's from CNN. So next slide, Simon. You have here a kind of a tale of two public school systems. You have the public school system of the past. And as I said in the beginning, the public school system was actually very religiously oriented. It was something that people just took for granted, that there would be religion in the public schools. There would be Bible stories in the public schools. There would be prayer in the public schools. And there is a history to this. And the history is simply that as the attitudes of the American public began to change, the attitudes toward religion also began to change. Now, what precipitated that is really anybody's guess. However, what's very interesting is that this movement, and it's been happening in various parts of the country, especially in the South, that there is something missing in the public schools. And we can guess why, right? In the public schools, the educational level is decreasing greatly. In the public schools, the violence that students are either encountering or are participating in has exponentially increased. Respect for parents, even to have a family. And I'll give a short anecdote here. I taught in public school for 5 years. Now, this was from I would say it was like 90 to 95, something like that. 1990 to 95. Well, I was in an inner city school, and it was a middle school, but it was also a middle school for those who were artistically gifted, like, for instance, in music and dance and art and so forth. And so half the school was from the inner city, very rough neighborhood. Half the school was in downtown Louisville, and half the school were these gifted children. And the idea was to kind of mix them together and hopefully that they would, learn from one another and inspire one another. And Louisville, Kentucky actually was always at the heart of the busing issue. They used to bus people in from all over the county. Some kids would be on the bus for an hour or more every day each way just to get bused to a different part of town. Well, it was difficult it was very difficult. I saw fights. I saw, I saw kids having sex, and this was in middle school. There were all kinds of altercations, and that was in 1995. Now go 30 years later and imagine how different everything is. And so we have to remember that, regardless of what we think about education and public education and should be homeschooling and so forth, the vast majority of our children are going to public schools. And I'm not advocating for necessarily anything right now. I just want to discuss this and see kind of what we think about this. Okay, let's look at the next slide. And it's about the history of religion in the US public schools. And essentially, what I'm saying here is that religion has played a significant role in public education really since the very beginning. Now, that does not mean that there were not religious differences, because even though there was the incorporation of Bible readings and prayers as a standard practice, obviously this country was far, a Protestant majority country for many, many years. And so there was a very heated, and even I think there were some riots regarding, for instance, in the United States, what version of the Bible they were going to use. And then you had the disagreements between Protestants and Catholics, and that really started the Roman Catholic education movement to have parochial schools. So essentially what happened was things were going along in the United States, and obviously we're not getting into segregation and busing and so forth, which was really a horrific time in our country. But even though this prayer and Bible reading was a part of the public school experience, what happened is in 1962, there was a ruling by the Supreme Court, and it said, it was Engel versus Vital. It said in 1962 that school organized prayer was unconstitutional. Okay, so that's one of the nuances here that we need to talk about is, and we'll look at this in a second, but there is the idea of, is prayer illegal in public schools? And the answer is no. We'll talk about that. But school-sponsored prayer, according to the most recent court cases, is actually, not permissible. I'm not a legal scholar. I'm just sort of telling you what this is. And then in 1963, the next Supreme Court decision came, which declared mandatory Bible readings in public schools unconstitutional. Now, many people think that, this might be the cause of some of the problems in society, that students and children are not being exposed to the scriptures. They're not being exposed to prayer. They're not being exposed to anything, beyond the material values of this world. They're not being exposed to some type of religious ethic, right? So where does this decision, where does this conflict come from? Well, it at least in terms of legal problems, it comes from the First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, and that First Amendment was written in 1791. And the First Amendment says this, and it's just the first part of the First Amendment. It says, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. All right? So, in other words, in the simplest terms is Congress is not going to say, one religion is going to be the state religion. So anything that the government does, including public education, which of course is owned by the government, is run by the government, means that they cannot say that everybody, or at least the official religion of the United States, is X, and then name some denomination. And obviously that comes out of the history of the United States. There were certain Protestants that came here fleeing what they said was the persecution by the British government, and especially the state church of the British government. And they weren't able to freely practice their religion. So they came here to this new world, and they established a place where they felt far enough away from the long arm of the King of England to be able to practice their religion, right? Now, there are two sides to the way that this particular amendment to the Constitution that was written in 1791 is seen. The first is that it expresses, and I'm not saying all legal scholars or all lawyers agree with this, but they say that what this particular issue means is that there is a wall of separation between the church and the state, or between, more aptly put, religion and the state, right? This comes from the writings of Thomas Jefferson. Now, this principle is not a law, but it is rather kind of imposed on the Constitution by certain legal scholars to say that when Thomas Jefferson was writing about the First Amendment, he said that it was important to have this First Amendment so that we would not have an established state church, nor would we prohibit the free exercise of religion. And by the way, that part of it became a big deal during COVID. But that's another issue for another day, okay? So Thomas Jefferson said that there is this wall of separation between religion and the state, which kind of keeps these two things from regulating the other. Now, there's another side to this, this idea of religion in the public square, and then, of course, the idea of religion in the public schools. And that is that, and this comes from the Supreme Court also, that there has to be an accommodation of religious expression, or an allowable accommodation of religious expression in even public institutions, because the establishment of the United States, the writings surrounding the Constitution, like the Declaration of Independence and the Federalist Papers and so forth, what they say is it presupposes a supreme being. It presupposes that there is a God, right? Like we have on our money, it says, "In God we trust." It is in the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag, right? Now, again, people have argued against it. People have argued for it. That's not what we're here to discuss. I'm just saying that the idea that the First Amendment is a slam dunk is not agreed upon by legal scholars. Some of them say there's a wall of separation. Some of them say you have to have an accommodation of religious expression in the public institution while not establishing a church state. So it's a very, very interesting, a very interesting problem. Now, I would love to hear from you about these things, and we're going to talk, we're going to listen to the superintendent, and then I want to hear your opinions. A couple of other things just before we get started. And these these things, I think, are now well established. It doesn't mean that there aren't court cases by both sides that say, look, a student has certain rights in public schools, and you are infringing on those rights. For instance, if a teacher, let's say that a student is wearing a cross, right? And a teacher says, you can't wear that cross in school. Well, that's actually illegal. That's against the rights of that particular student. So let's look at the students' rights in the public schools for religious expression under the Constitution. They have a right to pray. They have a right to express, and this is very interesting, they have a right to express their beliefs in their assignments, in artwork, and in other activities, and the teachers cannot stop them. It is illegal for them to do that. So if a student wants to write a paper on something like about Jesus, right, then nothing can stop them from doing that, nor can the teacher say, oh, I'm going to give you an F on this assignment because you wrote about Jesus, and that's illegal. Simon, let's put up that slide, students' right to religious expression. The next one, students have the right to form religious clubs. So they actually can say, oh, we're going to have a Bible club, or we're going to have an Orthodox club. I have students in my at our church that actually are forming a theology club. They're forming a theology club. I think that's amazing, right? So students have a way of working these things out, and the school cannot stop them. A student can wear religious symbols. A student can opt out of assignments and activities that conflicts with their beliefs. And this is also interesting. Students must have access to religious materials, not just religious materials that they bring, but the library must provide a certain amount of basic religious materials. Like they have to have a Bible in the library, and they have to have books about various religions in the library. That's part of the right of the students. Students have the right to celebrate religious holidays. Students have the right to distribute religious materials insofar as it doesn't conflict with the day or distract from the teaching. But if a student wants to hand a pamphlet to somebody and say, hey, I'm Orthodox, I want you to come to church with me, this is a little bit about orthodoxy, they can do that. They are free to do that. The next slide, however, balances that, but it also says that public schools and public school administrators and public school teachers, there are certain things that they cannot do. They cannot endorse or promote a particular religion. So they can't say, well, I think everybody should be Muslim, or I think everybody should be Christian or Jewish or whatever, or an atheist. They're not allowed to do that. They can't interfere with the students' free expression of religion. But the public schools can also not mandate student involvement in religious activities. In other words, the school cannot say, hey, we have a mandatory Bible study and everybody has to go. Like, they're not allowed to do that. They can't sponsor school prayer, right? So the principal can't start the morning by getting on the announcements and saying, okay, we're going to say a prayer in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. They can't do that, right? It doesn't mean students can't, but it means the administrators can't. And they can't coerce students. So they can't say, look, if you participate in this prayer, I'll give you an A, or I'll treat you better, or treat you worse, or whatever. So they have to be sort of neutral in all of these things, at least according to the current court cases and so forth. All right. Now, with that, we're going to listen to one more thing. We're going to listen to a couple of things. We're going to listen to the Oklahoma superintendent make this announcement, and then we're going to hear some of the opposition to it. So, Simon, let's go ahead and listen to the Oklahoma school superintendent announcing his decision.
We're going to make an important announcement today regarding the Bible and the Ten Commandments. My staff has been looking at Oklahoma statute. We've been looking at Oklahoma academic standards. And it's crystal clear to us that in the Oklahoma academic standards, under Title 70, multiple occasions, the Bible is a necessary historical document to teach our kids about the history of this country, to have a complete understanding of Western civilization, to have an understanding of the basis of our legal system, and is frankly, when we're talking about the Bible, one of the most foundational documents used for the Constitution and the birth of our country. We also find major points in history that refer to the Bible, that reference the Bible. We see multiple figures, whether we're talking about the Federalist Papers, constitutional conventional arguments, and Martin Luther King Jr., who use it as a tremendous impetus for the civil rights movement and tie many of those arguments back to the Bible. It is essential that our kids have an understanding of the Bible and its historical context. So we will be issuing a memo today that every school district will adhere to, which is that every teacher, every classroom in the state will have a Bible in the classroom and will be teaching from the Bible in the classroom to ensure that this historical understanding is there for every student in the state of Oklahoma in accordance with our academic standards and state law.
All right. So he made that announcement, and the reaction from various quarters, some teachers, some of the public, some of other religious leaders, was swift and negative. So, Simon, let's hear and watch that video.
Several speaking out after Superintendent of Oklahoma Schools Ryan Walters announced every class will have a Bible and be taught from it. Like Minister Lori Walke of Mayflower Congregational, quote, "Public schools are not Sunday schools." A Bible in every classroom. After I left Thursday's meeting with OSDE, Superintendent Walters' announcement, I wanted to see what folks outside of Christianity had to say about it.
Interjecting religious scripture in the classroom is not the best way to go about it.
Adam Soltani of CARE advocates for the Muslim community in Oklahoma.
My immediate reaction was concern for the constitutional rights of our students and their families.
Keep religion out of it.
Rachel Johnson, the Jewish Federation of Greater Oklahoma City.
Our reaction was, it's a little troubling to hear. It's threatening our religious freedom.
Rajan Zed, Hindu statesman, saying it's fine, quote, as long as lessons from ancient Sanskrit scripture Bhagavad Gita are also included. Tim Ward, the American atheist, calling it Christian nationalism, saying they're, quote, looking into potential legal responses.
It really doesn't work in a pluralistic democracy.
Lucian Greaves of the Satanic Temple, they already started a class in Oklahoma in response to a bill giving students credit for religious instruction.
He's going to end up getting the school districts in the state of Oklahoma and some legal problems that they're going to have to end up paying off.
He has abused the power of the state.
Rachel Lasser, CEO of Americans United for Separation of Church and State, suing after Louisiana mandated the Ten Commandments in classrooms, saying Oklahoma could be next.
We've seen Ryan Walters in a short time that he served as the head of public education in your state on a Christian nationalist crusade to impose his version, really, of conservative Christianity.
Now, the Supreme Court ruled earlier this month the decision for curriculum and books comes right down to individual school districts. If a school rejects it, Walters' order, and goes to court, that would make it an easy case for them to win.
Okay. So next slide real fast, Simon, if you don't mind. And that is that this superintendent was actually sued. And basically what happened was more than a dozen petitioners in Oklahoma, including religious leaders, public school parents, teachers, filed the lawsuit on Thursday in state Supreme Court. The group argues that the Bible education mandate signed by Superintendent of Public Instruction Ryan Walters on June 27th is unlawful. It has asked Oklahoma's highest court to rescind the order and prevent the state from taking any action to enforce or advance the measure. Walters said at the time he issued the mandate that the Bible is an indispensable historical and cultural touchstone. He has also said that the teachers who refuse to teach the Bible could lose their teaching license. All right. So, what do you think about all of this? I think it's really fascinating. And if you're from Oklahoma, I would love to hear from you, especially. Let us know in the comment section if you are from Oklahoma. So, want to hear from you in the YouTube comments or on Facebook, or 412-716-6457. I'm sorry. Nope, that's not that number. 412-206-5012. That's the number. 412-206-5012. All right, let's go to some of the comments here. The first one in line is Joachim, and Joachim says, 10 Commandments, take them or leave them. What we should have is the Beatitudes. Well, that's an interesting comment, Joachim. I know that, the Beatitudes, of course, are the teachings of Christ. And, let's be honest about this, right? So, what's happening here is this is clearly, because this is Oklahoma, right? Like, this is the buckle of the Bible Belt. This is a kind of Protestant movement, okay? And what they're trying to do, I think, I'm not advocating for it. I think it's very clever. Because what the superintendent did is he said, look, the Bible is a part of our history. And if you're going to teach American history, you have to teach the Bible that inspired a lot of American history, right? And he talks about Dr. Martin Luther King and so forth, trying to get all of the different factions behind this particular measure. But at the heart of it, I do think that this is at first a kind of movement to bring the Bible back into the classroom. And specifically, I do think it has, because it's like the Bible, right? And not religion. I think it has a kind of Protestant bent to it, right? Because they think if you just put the Bible back in the schools, like everything's going to be okay, right? But, I kind of doubt that part of it. It's complicated. Like, what are the teachers going to say? Supposedly there are lessons. I don't know if this was well thought out, but it is very, very interesting. All right. So thank you very much, Joachim. And Daniel, right below him, says, the Beatitudes don't exclude the 10 Commandments. And I agree with you on that. Of course, the 10 Commandments are, they become the way that Christ expresses them is in that Sermon on the Mount. The Sermon on the Mount, where the Beatitudes reside, Matthew 5-7, are they're a gloss. They are a light through which we see the 10 Commandments. So let's see here. Bionic Kraken. I hope I said that right. Bionic Kraken. I would think it totally weird if the public education excluded the Bible or the 10 Commandments. Well, it has been excluded for quite a while. The guidelines that I spoke of are, that this was sort of like very hard thought. This was something that It went from having prayer in public schools and having Bible readings and so forth to having nothing. And there were teachers that overreacted, and there are all kinds of lawsuits. You can look them up at various places. But for instance, if a kid wore a cross, they would say, you have to take that off. Or if a kid wrote a paper about Jesus, he said, well, you can't do that, you fail. Or if, there are lawsuits that were, for instance, a little girl praying by herself before lunch. And the teacher came over. This is a real story. The teacher came over and said, stop that. You can't do that. Right. So there was this overreaction in the public schools, which of course is terrible. And I think there were organizations that came in and tried to set the record straight and say, well, here's what rights students do have. All right. Bionic Kraken also says below there, the Oklahoma education bureaucrat makes a good argument that there is literally plenty of secular justification to mandate the Bible in the public curriculum. I think that's a very good point. I agree with you, Bionic, because, like I said, I think this is clever. I think this is very clever. I think that the way he went around that. Now, it's clear he has a political agenda. If you listen to other talks that he gave, answers that he gave, he said that this is specifically designed to fight against a quote unquote woke agenda. Of course, I've talked about the woke agenda many times on my program also, saying how, much of that has sort of distorted people's minds and so forth. So he's saying that he's doing this specifically with a political agenda. Let's see here. Let's go down to Diakonos also agrees. I like Diakonos's both of your comments here. You say, well, that's a very convincing argument he makes. Yeah, I think it's very, very interesting. And then Diakonos says, hey, Gov, teach them church history too. I love it. Well, look, it's history, right? If you're going to teach history, by the way, I can also tell you, I have men in my parish who are teachers in the public schools. And as teachers, they have taught the Byzantine Empire. They have taught church history. I had one teacher that had them, it was something about iconography. He had them pasting icons or something, which that's sort of the guidelines that I gave was probably pretty iffy, but if they're being exposed to this, and if they're being exposed to it in a way that is within the public school guidelines, saying, wow, this is history, hey, think about it. It's not a bad thing. Sante Pat next says, it's not a history textbook. So Sante Pat, I agree with you that the Bible, well, I won't say that the Bible is not a history textbook. Certainly parts of it absolutely are a historical text. That is to say, they tell us the history. The book of Acts tells us the history. Judges tells us history. So there is history in the Bible, but that's not what he's saying here. What the Oklahoma governor is saying is that the Bible itself is a part of the founding of the United States, and therefore students should be exposed to the Bible. He doesn't really say how. They should be exposed to the Bible as a very important part of the founding of our country. All right. Okay. Let's see here. Joachim again says, I wouldn't want to impose orthodoxy exactly, but our tradition does stuff for good reasons. I agree with that. And we're going to talk a little bit about imposing religion. In my comments at the end, I do want to talk about that. It's very, very important. Let's see here. Harry Garris. Harry Garris says, American history is less informed by the Bible and is more a continual falling away from the right understanding of it. So, Harry, I agree with you certainly from the standpoint of if we look at American culture today, I think there's not much about it that is very biblical or God-pleasing. I think from the standpoint of the history of our country, when you read the documents, obviously, the founding fathers of the United States were all over the map in terms of religion, right? You had the Jefferson himself, who was a deist, who sort of cut up parts of the Bible. There's the famous Jefferson Bible, right? Which is like half of it's gone. There is some other founding fathers of the United States who were deists, who even sort of, they admired things about Islam and so forth. And some of them were Protestant Christians, right? They were a very particular type of Protestant Christians. I think most of them were, Protestant Christians that might, I would say, certainly decry any kind of iconography or anything like that. So, yeah, definitely they are a mixed bag. Daniel Beardsley next. I work in a public school, and I see how they teach Christianity via social studies. It's odd. I frankly don't trust just any teacher to teach the Bible, nor is it appropriate in every classroom. Yeah, I mean, from a parent standpoint, I think this is something that we have to think about, right? So, if you have a teacher and the teacher has to, let's say, in a compulsory way, read from the Bible for some reason, however they're integrating it into history or social studies, they could be distorting that, right? They could be giving their own views. They could be saying things from their own experience. They could be an atheist and says, well, this is all garbage, but I have to read this, right? So I think it's going to be a mixed bag. It's going to be very interesting to see how this kind of works out. Now, the reality is, and I've spent many, many times in Oklahoma. I used to work there. When I worked for a particular company, I worked on and off there. And it is deeply, deeply evangelical Protestant. So, I think they're kind of safer there than, let's say, if you tried this in the state of Washington, right? Or the state of Colorado or, Vermont. Like, that isn't going to fly in those particular states. But in Oklahoma, they'll probably get away with it. But we'll see. Let's see here. Diakonos says, my small PA town's public school has a Bible club led by one of the football coaches. The city park also has a monument of the Ten Commandments and a statue of Archangel Michael. And then he says, as secular as the nearby Pittsburgh public schools are, it seems the more rural districts are preserving some religious traditions, right? So I agree with you. I think that there's probably a real nuance to this. I don't think you're going to see this in, large metropolitan cities like New York City or Los Angeles, right? You're not going to see this happen in those particular places. But, in smaller towns, rural areas, I think this may be a very interesting movement that we see here. Roche Hever, excuse me if I'm not pronouncing that correctly. Roche says, we need common sense here. but this whole subject is fraught, I think, with serious questions for the OC, which means Orthodox Christians. What Bible? Who wrote the lessons? Which books are omitted? Teachers' own prejudicial opinions and comments. And then Roche says, I have no faith this can be carried out in a cogent, informative way that satisfies all the communities and groups out there. Yeah, I would basically say this is going to be tough. This is going to be tough. And then Joachim answered Daniel, I work in a public school and the idea of random people teaching the Bible to kids is horrifying. Okay. Yeah. I mean, this is going to be tough. I think it's going to be very interesting to see here. Let's go down a little bit. Let's see here. Oh, I know what I can do. I want to read you some comments from my own Facebook because I think it's very important. Now, Simon, obviously you don't have access to these, but I do want to read, because actually they're still commenting. There's 40 comments on my page about this particular subject. So just let me read some of these. And if you're my Facebook friend, you can go on there. Father Justin says, my fear is that we'll get Baptist Jesus. And then he has the throw up his hands emoji. No thanks. I'd like to see biblical literacy, though. I agree with you. I think that's very, very important. I think there should be some kind of biblical literacy involved in this. Lance says, this is again on my Facebook, so some of you might not be able to see this. It says, if you're okay with them teaching your kids Southern Baptist or evangelical or Joel Osteen Jesus, sure, I guess you should have no problem with it. I sure do, though. You're still allowed to pray at schools, by the way. It's not been banned like some pundits claim whenever they want to try to make uninformed people who won't fact check upset. I agree to a certain extent. It is certainly allowed. I don't think all the teachers got the memo. Like, that's the real problem here. I also wanted to read a comment by Father John Kotalik, and he said, which is very interesting, and I wasn't aware of this. He said, we Orthodox would do well to remember that our Roman Catholic friends were some of the firmest advocates for the removal of prayer and religious studies from public schools because they didn't want their children to be praying with Protestants or being taught their theology and prayers. For the same reason the Latins so fought it in the 50s and 60s, we ought to resist it now. I'd rather our children get no Jesus in school, thus leaving it to our own parents to teach them who Christ is, than Baptist Jesus, as Father Justin suggests. Now, here's the only thing that I would answer there, and that is, nature abhors a vacuum. And I believe that when the Bible was somehow and God was pushed out of public schools, and there was a time when it just seemed like you could not do anything or say anything religious in the public schools until there were certain organizations that started to push and push and push. And then there were court cases, and then this was all defined. So yes, today in 2024, this issue is clear in the public schools, but it was not even 20 years ago. I assure you of that. And you can look at all of the big court cases that, again, kids told, don't, if your t-shirt says, I love Jesus, right? Jesus is my savior. The teachers would say, turn that around. You're not allowed to wear that, right? You're offending people. And that's against the Constitution. That's against the law. So that was happening. I think teachers and schools are a little bit more knowledgeable about it and sophisticated today. But I assure you, those things were happening. Let's see here. I want to read one, actually, a couple of more. Scott Scott said on my Facebook, not a good idea. I don't want a public school teacher trained at a secular university to teach the Bible or lead a prayer. And Kathy says, and of course, this is a big issue. What if you're Jewish or Muslim or any other religion? And I think that's something that we need to look at. Finally, Lex says, personally, I'm not a fan. I'm less concerned about kids getting a non-Orthodox perspective. One does not have to be Orthodox to read and interpret the Bible well. Most of the Bible has little to do with specific doctrinal teachings. The latter requires church history and semantics. The bigger problem is that most people don't read or interpret the Bible well in the first place. He says the bigger issues are most Christians don't read the scriptures. Most people are not Christian in the first place. So what we need is strong Christian formation in churches and robust evangelism in public. Then maybe we can talk about teaching in the public schools. So, this I think is, I think that's an interesting comment, and it's an interesting point. I want to go back to a couple of different comments. You have BJ Hustal on YouTube. BJ Hustal on YouTube, it's like the fifth from the bottom. Would this not be best taught in a homeschool setting? So here, I want to address this just for a second. Of course, homeschooling has taken off. By the way, I was looking up the homeschool statistics yesterday in preparation for this program. It's very interesting. Homeschooling went up at the beginning of COVID, and then it went down, and now it's back up to where it was at the beginning of COVID. So it did not grow exponentially like I thought it would. What happened with homeschooling is, like near the end of COVID, the numbers went down for homeschooling, and then it went back up to where it was at the beginning of COVID. So homeschooling, that's a tough haul. Not every family is able to do homeschooling. Not every parent is able to be a proficient teacher. And so I think God bless the homeschoolers. I totally support homeschooling. I think homeschooling is a very important part of this educational puzzle, along with Orthodox schools, classical schools, parochial schools, Christian schools. I think all of these things, private schools, there has to be a way to get the public schools to the point where they are instilling morals and instilling discipline and instilling some kind of standards, because it has declined so much. And again, not trying to get off topic here, but I think if I can defend anything about this Oklahoma school superintendent, I believe that he believes that by bringing the Bible back into the school, that somehow order will be maintained in the school, right? I think that's a long shot. Now, is it better that they hear something, that they hear nothing? Probably, but I don't know. I think it's going to be tough, because you have school system which is spinning out of control. And I don't know whether bringing the Bible back in this historical context is really going to change anything. Joachim says, not every teacher is able to be a proficient teacher. You're absolutely right, Joachim. That's true, including in public schools. And I will also say, not every priest is able to be a proficient priest, right? So I think that's across the board. I think you're absolutely right. All right. So I wanted to see if there was anything going on let's see, Ancient Faith. Oh, we're not streaming on there. Okay. I don't think we are. Okay. So we're just on YouTube right now. Okay. Oh, no, we're not. Yes, we are on. I don't have any comments on Facebook. All right. Let's see here. Oh, we got a text message. If you want to send a text message, we have a few more minutes left 412-206-5012. Our writer writes, as Orthodox Christians with our children in public schools, would we not be concerned how the Bible is being introduced and read or taught? The American history noted by the superintendent would not be from an Orthodox perspective rather than a perspective we as Orthodox Christians would not support. No? Well, I don't know. I think I would assume that they are trying to do this from the standpoint of really, just trying to get the Bible and saying, oh, here's what Dr. Martin Luther King said. Here's what this founding father said. He quoted from this passage of the scripture. So I'm not sure that there's really a kind of a sectarian agenda here. I don't know. I think it's almost unavoidable, though. All right, let's go to, I would say, the last three slides here. The last three slides, let's look at that, Simon. So I have some questions, right? I have some questions, and I'm sure that you have these same questions in mind, or maybe others. My question is, what motivated this policy? Why did the Oklahoma superintendent create this policy? I suspect it's probably what he feels is the marginalization of Christianity in the public square, where there's an increasing hostility to anything religious, right? I'm just guessing, but I think that's probably a pretty good guess. Is there a political motivation? I suspect there is. And I think he's been very clear about that, right? He is a conservative, and he is saying that, we're going to answer a liberal agenda that has been marginalizing the Bible and Christianity by saying, we're going to mandate the Bible within the context of history. I have another question. How does our tradition, our Orthodox tradition, inform religion in education issues, right? Well, I think it's hard to tell, because the public school phenomenon in the United States is relatively recent, right? It's only like 100 years old. This idea of educating all students, all children, is a relatively recent idea for the United States and for other countries. And so, having a one-size-fits-all type of education, we've had classical education experts, we've had parochial school education experts on our program in the past, and they eschew the public school education system by saying that it tries to create someone in the one mold, right? That public school is meant to, you have to learn this, you have to learn that, you have to learn these subjects, and it is to make you a kind of productive member of society. And they said that's, from their standpoint, that's a kind of problem. I hope I'm saying that correctly, but I think that's the gist of it. And that is that it doesn't allow, the public school education doesn't allow students to kind of grow and to think always critically, because you have one teacher for 26 students or 30 students, and you have mandated subjects, and you have ways that they have to be taught, including in this particular situation. The Oklahoma State Superintendent is saying, here's the document, you have to teach in this particular way, right? So that might be a problem. Now, from our Orthodox standpoint, we know that in the Roman Empire, the Byzantine Empire, there was a cooperation between the church and the state. It wasn't always easy. They call it symphonia, right? But it wasn't always pretty. We have bishops and teachers and priests that were killed, right, by the state, because the state decided, oh, this doctrine was the right one and that one was the right one. And then all of a sudden, the doctrines became a political issue. So that can be fraught with difficulty from the standpoint of Orthodox Christians who live in a pluralistic, so-called democratic society, right? And here's the other question. Can Orthodox Christians be supportive of this particular issue? That is the Oklahoma governor. I haven't heard from any folks from Oklahoma. Send me a text message, 412-206-5012, or send me an email to aft@ancientfaith.com. If you're from Oklahoma, I would love to hear what you think about this. I don't know. Can an Orthodox Christian be supportive of this? Do we have to think about pluralism? And I have just a very brief slide here before we shut down. I have a very, very brief slide about how religion, the subject of religion, is handled in schools in Orthodox majority countries. So I want you to look at this slide. This is very interesting. So I just took two. Like, there's a lot more. There's Romania and Bulgaria and so forth. But how is religious education handled in at least these two Orthodox countries? The first is in Greece. In Greece, religion class, it's literally called religious education, is mandatory for grades 3 through 12. It is compulsory for Orthodox Christian students. However, other students, non-Orthodox Christians, non-Christians, and those who consider themselves to be atheists are exempt from that religious education in the public schools in Greece. However, every day in Greek public schools, I believe, somebody correct me if I'm wrong, begins with a morning prayer. So that's interesting, even in 2024. Although, as you follow the politics of Greece, I think you can see things are changing very quickly. And then in Russia, Russia has a smaller program, obviously coming out of communism in 1989. I can't remember, 1989, whatever it was, they sort of slowly tried to regain some type of relationship with the state. Now, we're not here to talk about Russia's relationship with the state right now, because as others said, there's a lot of misinformation about that. Right now in Russia, there is a compulsory class only for grades 4 and 5, and it's called The Fundamentals of Religious Cultures and Secular Ethics. The Fundamentals of Religious Cultures and Secular Ethics. And there are 5 parts to this class. That is 5 groups. So you have to enter into one of those groups, and that track is entirely in the philosophy of that particular religion. So there's an Orthodox Christianity track, there is an Islamic track, there's a Buddhism track, there's a Judaism track, and there's a secular ethics track. So the students in grades 4 or 5, I assume through their parents, pick a track and they go through that in grades 4 or 5. And that's how they are taught religion and religious values. And I think that's very, very interesting. All right. Very good. So here's my thoughts. Let's wrap this up. This was a lot of fun. It's something a little bit different. We don't always talk about things like this. But it's, if you're a citizen in the United States, this is something that as an Orthodox Christian, you need to think about. I don't necessarily have the answers about this. I have my opinions. But let's look at this. Here are my thoughts. The first thing to remember is the vast majority of students in the United States attend public schools. So easy answers like to say, well, they should go to homeschool, or they should go to public school or private school, or they should go to an Orthodox school. How many Orthodox schools are there in the United States? Or what are we talking about? 5, 10? You can't say go to an Orthodox school. So, 90% of students in this country still go to public schools, even more than that. Even the majority of Christian students still attend public schools. There are more Christians in public schools than there are in private schools, home schools, and parochial schools. Okay? So we have to remember that. And what happens in public schools actually does shape the future of the United States. Because those children, let's say it's 90% of students and children that are in public schools, they're the ones who are going to be getting the jobs and, doing all of the things and shaping the future of this country. So helping them get a sense of what is right, what is wrong, giving them good things. Father Hopko always used to say this, by the way. Father Hopko, and it seems so simple, but this is it was like a moment of clarity for me when he said this. He said, we only teach children good things. We only teach children good things. Now, what does that mean? We only teach children good things. That means, for instance, we don't teach children who are 5 years old, Johnny feels like a girl and therefore he's a girl. Like, we don't teach children that. We don't teach children. We should not, as Orthodox Christians, teach children, Billy has 2 dads. We don't teach children that. As Orthodox Christians, we have to teach children good things. We have to raise them to be good. We don't teach children, what gender do you feel like today? What is your preferred pronouns? This is ridiculous. We can't do this. And if we want to know, why things are going south in certain areas in the country, this one dictum of Father Hopko, I think, is very important. Teach children good things. And I would add, give them a sense of transcendence. In the public schools, don't just make everything about the physical, science and math and this and that and history. Make it about something transcendent. People believe that there is something more to this world than just what you can see. Even if you have to talk about it from a philosophical standpoint, allow children to explore that. But the public schools don't really do that. So whether it's the Bible or great stories or whatever it is, we have to expose children to these great ideas. That's very important. And the last thing, and again, this is just patristic teaching. This is an Orthodox principle. We cannot ever coerce anyone into anything. I know we can look at our history. We can say, well, what about this war? And what about that war? And look at the Russians and look at you can't do that. St. John Chrysostom says, God does not coerce. God does not coerce. That's what he said. And in fact, the way he said it is, God forces no one. He said, free will is essential. The things that you do, your faith, your good deeds, they come from your free choice, not from compulsion. Now, God's Spirit is moving, right? This is what the scriptures say. But your free will has to join into that. He said, God is a teacher who gently leads people toward faith and virtue. He's not a forceful ruler. And then he says, and this is the kicker, because why does God not coerce? Why does God not force? Why does God give us free will? He says, by not using coercion, God holds individuals accountable for their own free choices, and then they experience the consequences of their actions. That's what he said. And the reason that I say this is as a kind of maybe a balance to this, to say, okay, even if we permit the reading of the scriptures, the posting of the Bible, whatever it is that they're doing in Oklahoma, to say like, this is a part of our history. And, we want to, this is what Dr. Martin Luther King said and whatever, however they're going to do that. We have to be careful not to force anyone ever, because, forced Christians make bad Christians. This has to be a matter of the will. Let's teach our children good things. And if it means let's expose them to the Bible, even if it's historical literature, hey, it's better than nothing. It's better than nothing. Let's do something. Our children are worth it, okay? Let's not be sectarian. Let's not fall into sort of like Oklahoma Jesus. We don't want to do that. But let's do something for our children that helps them actually experience and be exposed to the words of the divine scriptures. Last thing, Fotini Pazartsis says, unfortunately, morning prayers in Greece are no longer in place in public schools. The move of the state away from religion has led in recent years that even the religion class is not around orthodoxy. That's sad to hear. I appreciate that particular update. And I think this is the way that things are going. So we have to be careful. Whatever we do, we don't have to leave it to the public schools. If your kids are in public schools, read the scriptures with them at home. Don't leave it to the public schools. By the way, don't just leave it to your church either. Open that Bible, read it with your children. This is very important. Don't leave it to somebody else. Don't even leave it to the priest. You have to teach your children. This is so important. Read the Bible every night. This is absolutely, before you say your prayers, read the scriptures, a short portion. There will always be something that you will get from it. I promise you, God's Spirit will not leave you empty-handed. Okay? Whether you agree with the Bible in public schools or not, Orthodox Christians, read the scriptures, read it to your students, and you will not be disappointed. Thanks to everybody who commented. Thanks to Matushka Trudy. Thanks to Simon. And thanks to you and to those who are going to be listening after this show. That's our show for tonight, or today. I guess it's tonight for me. Make sure to like us on Facebook at facebook.com/ancientfaithtoday. Share out our link here. Get this conversation started. This is a lot of fun. Invite somebody next time. I'm going to be here next Tuesday afternoon at 5 p.m. Eastern, 2 p.m. Pacific time on Ancient Faith Today Live. Good night, everybody.